Hello, my name's Tom Stapleton, Executive Director of the Wakefield Community Access Television Station. And today we have Senator Jason Lewis with us today. The Senator does many of these programs throughout the year to keep his constituents and communities informed as to what's going on at the State House and in their communities. So welcome, Senator. Nice to see you again.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be back with you, as always.
A lot has happened since the last time we met, so why don't we just get right into it? Okay.
Great.
Very good. Substance abuse and opioid addiction continue to be major issues for our region. What is the latest from Beacon Hill to combat these plagues in our communities?
Yes, indeed. It is such a tragic issue, and we're continuing, sadly, to see overdoses and overdose deaths that are just, just so sad. And I'm, this is an issue that touches all of us. Almost everybody knows somebody, whether it's in their family or a friend or a neighbor, who's suffering with substance addiction. I think the most important thing is that as a society, we're coming to see addiction as an illness, and that we need to focus on prevention and treatment, and not as a criminal justice issue. So that's a very big change in thinking I think we've come to over the last few years. We've been working in the legislature very closely with Governor Baker and also with Attorney General Healy and District Attorney Marion Ryan here in our area. We've been working with our law enforcement and our hospitals and our patient advocacy groups. And we did finish work on legislation that the governor just signed, which I'm very pleased about, and that's really aimed at improving the prevention and the treatment and the education around substance abuse, and particularly opioids and heroin. Right. So we're now going to be, for example, limiting first-time prescriptions for opioids to 7 days. Also, we'll have better take-back programs for excess pills. We'll also be doing more education of doctors around alternative pain management treatments, and also more education in our schools, to help our students understand the risks here and to get them help if they need it at the earliest possible age, so we can head this off.
Right.
So there's a lot of other provisions in the bill as well, but I'm hopeful we will start to turn the corner and to really get this epidemic under control.
Yeah. Well, along with yourself and District Attorney Marion Ryan, I know you've been working closely with her on that. This press release came across my desk. I'm going to read it out. It's a little long, bear with me, but I think it's important to get this out, and maybe you could have some thoughts on this when we get through. Middlesex District Attorney Marion Ryan and Mike Duggan from Wicked Sober will be issuing an important call to action in response to drastic increase in overdose deaths in Massachusetts and in the Middlesex counties. In the past 3 weeks, state police assigned to the Middlesex District Attorney Office has responded to 20 fatality overdoses. We have seen a dangerous spike in deaths and non-fatal overdoses. We are looking to call attention to this critical issue and provide important information from Wicked Sober for families and loved ones who are suffering from this addiction, so they can take this action to stop this dangerous trend.
That's exactly, it says a lot, and that's exactly what we were just talking about, is just how many families are impacted by this illness, and just how tragic these overdose deaths are that we've been seeing, everywhere. We've seen them here in Wakefield and unfortunately all around the state and the country. Middlesex District Attorney Ryan's been a tremendous leader on this issue, and working very hard on prevention and treatment. One of the provisions included in the legislation I mentioned is because one of the things we're seeing is people are overdosing, being taken by emergency responders to the hospital. They're treated for a few hours and then they're released, and then they may overdose again. Sometimes even the same day, but otherwise later. So one of the provisions in the bill is now our hospital will have to be a 24-hour hold and evaluation. So we are sensitive to the challenges in our hospitals in doing this, but we think this was a good solution. So the idea is, at least if somebody does overdose, hopefully they survive, they are at the hospital, that there will be an opportunity for an intervention and to try to get that person into detox and treatment, so that we can head off another overdose.
Well, I guess Narcan has played a big part in that too, which is an amazing tool to have at the time
Yep.
when somebody has overdosed, and it's been very successful.
That's right. That's a very successful initiative we've pursued now for a few years, is getting Narcan widely distributed and trying to subsidize the cost for our law enforcement. But that's if we didn't have Narcan, we would have far more people even dying of overdoses. The key is, once you reverse the overdose, get the person into treatment, start down that road to becoming sober. The other thing the legislature has done, and Governor Baker, is we also made it a crime to traffic in fentanyl, which is a very dangerous substance that is often cut with heroin, and it's actually what leads to a lot of these deaths. It's the fentanyl. So up until recently, it wasn't even a crime to traffic that drug, but now that is the case. So DA Ryan and law enforcement can also now go after traffickers of fentanyl.
And that happened recently?
That happened last year.
Last year, okay, very good. All right. Well, listen, on a lighter subject, solar energy. I think you have some really good news about that. Would you like to talk about
that?
Yes,
so changing topics here quite a bit, but a very important issue for our communities is energy policy, and we've been working, Massachusetts actually has been a leader for a long time now in encouraging more renewable energy, particularly solar energy and energy efficiency, trying to move away from fossil fuels, which are very bad for the environment, of course, and contributing to global warming. This legislation, we actually just finished work on it yesterday. It's going to the Governor Baker now, and what it does is it raises the cap for solar energy. So that means there will be now an ability to have more solar projects throughout Massachusetts, more solar panels being installed, and that's good for the environment. It's also very good for the economy, because we've got, it's essentially the green economy.
Right.
We've got a lot of businesses now in the state, a lot of jobs that are tied to solar. So this bill will encourage further investment and development of solar energy. We're also working on additional legislation in this area, which will encourage more wind development offshore. The Cape Wind project, which was proposed, has been very controversial.
Right.
That's probably not moving forward. But we have some new proposals further out, away from the shore. And Massachusetts, our coast, has been referred to as the Saudi Arabia of wind. So it tells you something about the opportunity we have to tap that energy. So if we can do more of that, continue to do solar, I'm open to hydropower as well, which the governor is pushing. And I think those are very important to bring down our use of fossil fuels. We are also, the nuclear plant, power plant in Plymouth is going to be shutting down. So we are going to need to replace that power with additional, hopefully additional clean energy. So that's why this is important for the future of our state.
Sounds like a great program. And I think as more people see it and hear about it, they'll get more involved themselves too.
And there are opportunities. I'm sure there are residents, here in Wakefield and watching, who may already have looked into solar panels for their home. But there are some good programs that help subsidize the cost of installing the solar panels, and then because of what's called net metering, the energy that you generate, from your panels, essentially credits back to you against your electric bill. So it's a great way to reduce the cost of electricity for homeowners.
Well, that's a savings.
That's a savings, right? So you can save money as well.
Everybody should look into, really.
Yes. Unfortunately, we looked into it for my house, but the roof is a little too steep, and the angle of the sun wasn't quite right, so we weren't able to do it. But for those homeowners who can do it, it's definitely, I think, worth looking into.
I did that back in the 70s. I'm going back a few years, I did get solar and put it on top of my house, and it heated the hot water.
Yes.
So that's all it did, and it really worked out very well. The only problem, like you say, is the direction of the sun was, it couldn't lay flat on the roof. They had to have these stanchions, and so you look on your roof and you have this enormous plates of solar panels up there, and it didn't look good.
It didn't look so good. The good news is that the technology has come so far that now the panels are much smaller and thinner, and they can be installed in better ways, and they can generate a lot more power too. So that's worth exploring.
I was able to shut my hot water off. In the summer, and it was great. It was really great.
It saves you money.
Yeah,
that's right.
Anyways,
and good for the environment.
It was good for the environment then. Let's talk about charter schools. I know that's something that's dear to your heart, and here in Wakefield, too, they'd be interested to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, well, education policy in general is a very high priority for me, and school funding. I actually, while I think there are some very good charter schools in the state, I'm generally not a supporter of just lifting lifting the cap on charter schools, because I want to focus on the needs of of all of our students. And there have been a lot of concerns about when kids leave the district school to go to a charter school, the money is drained away from the regular district schools, and that's becoming increasingly a concern in Wakefield as well as other parts of my district. So there's a group of people who are very strong proponents of having more charter schools in the state, and they are pushing to have a ballot question in November when we have the presidential election. So the state Senate has been working for several months to try to craft legislation that would be a compromise and that would head off the ballot question, because we think that will be a very expensive and divisive battle over whether we should have more or fewer charter schools. And in fact, hot off the press, just last night, I was at the State House till about 9 o'clock, and we were in the state Senate debated, very vigorous debate, and passed a bill, a compromise bill. The vote was, I think, 22-13.
Wow.
So there was a lot of strong feelings on both sides. I did end up supporting the legislation because it does, first of all, it has a lot of reforms in there for our current charter schools to make sure that the funding is fairer, that the governance is improved for charter schools, that they take the same kinds of students that are served by the district schools, so that they're not creaming off certain students. And most importantly, which has been a very high priority for me in the legislature and very important to Wakefield, is the Chapter 70 school funding, which is how we determine how much money each school district gets. And this bill, and I think the most important feature in the provision in the bill, is the bill will starts the implementation of the recommendations of the Foundation Budget Review Commission, which was legislation I had filed several years ago. And that will lead to improvements in school funding for Wakefield and other communities to address the real needs, like the increases in healthcare costs, increases in special education, new technology. So that's a very important component of this bill, was probably the main reason in the end why I voted for it. And so more to come on this topic, because next the House of Representatives will have to debate their version of a charter school bill. Likely it'll be very different from the Senate, so then there'll have to be negotiations over that. My guess is this may still end up going to the ballot in November. So folks watching at home, this is a topic everybody will need to become familiar with, and will probably be voting on in November, in the November elections.
You said it's a compromise?
The bill we passed is a compromise because the ballot question it would simply remove the cap on the number of charter schools in Massachusetts, and it would allow a certain number of new schools every year. The Senate bill would allow some more charter schools, but that would be linked to the full implementation of the Foundation Budget Review Commission recommendations. So, in other words, if we're not fully funding our public schools and meeting the responsibilities that I believe the state has, then there wouldn't be any more charter schools allowed. And then in addition to that, the Senate bill includes a lot of different reforms that our school committees and our district superintendents have been pushing for many years. For example, that the children that are served by a charter school, like let's say the Mystic Valley Charter School, which serves some Wakefield students, really should look like the students from the sending district in terms of how many students are special needs, how many students are English language learners, how many students are low income. And we have seen some problems with some charter schools, where the students that they're serving are not always representative of the district that the students come from. So there's some changes like that, some improvements to how charter schools are governed, how transparent they have to be with their, with their finances and things like that.
Well, let me ask you this question: where does the money come for Chapter 70?
So Chapter 70 is a combination of local funding and state funding.
Okay.
And the way it works is first let's just take Wakefield, for example.
All right.
There's a calculation made for how much it should cost to educate Wakefield students. So that takes into account how many students there are, in the elementary schools, middle and high school, how many students are low income, how many special needs. Then the next step is it's determined how much can Wakefield contribute from its own property tax base. So obviously more affluent communities are expected to contribute more than less affluent. And then the state makes up the difference, and that's called Chapter 78. The problem has been that the calculation of how much Wakefield students need, and the calculation for Melrose and Stoneham and so on, hasn't been updated in 20 years. So the assumptions for how much it costs in health insurance, how much it costs for special needs, how much it costs for technology, for teacher professional development, all of these things have changed a lot in 20 years. And that's what the bill that I filed and the recommendations of this Foundation Budget Review Commission are all trying to update and modernize.
I asked you that question.
And the bill includes the implementation of those recommendations.
Yeah, I asked that question because a lot of people are unaware of where this money comes from, and that synopsis you just gave was good.
And ultimately, of course, it comes from the taxpayers,
really,
either paying local property taxes or through sales taxes or income taxes that we pay. But then it becomes a shared responsibility between the town and the state.
All right, we're going to change directions again here, and we're going all over the place, but it's important to get all these out. You have received a lot of attention for your role as chairman of the Special Senate Committee on Marijuana. Would you discuss that experience and give us your thoughts on the marijuana policy?
Right, so this is a good segue because we were just talking about education and charter schools, and I was saying how, notwithstanding the fact that the Senate passed a compromise, it may still end up on the ballot in November, and the voters will get to decide on this issue of more charter schools or not. Also in November, there's a group of people that's pushing to have a ballot question that would legalize marijuana for recreational use and sale in Massachusetts. So that would be a major social change in our state. We currently allow marijuana for if people have a medical reason, they can get certified by a doctor. And we also, several years ago, decriminalized marijuana. So if you are caught possessing, smoking a joint, you wouldn't be arrested and go to jail. You might just have to pay a fine. The Senate President, Senator Rosenberg, about a year ago, anticipating that there might be this ballot question coming, he asked me to lead an effort in the state Senate to look at all of the issues around marijuana legalization, to look at what's happened in Colorado, for example, and Washington, because those are states that have already legalized marijuana, and understand, what would be the public health ramifications, public safety, economic and fiscal issues. So I led that effort. We interviewed about 75 experts from Massachusetts and around the country, people in healthcare, law enforcement, government officials, marijuana reform advocates, industry people, a whole gamut. We also, I led a delegation of, I think it was 8 senators who actually went to Colorado. We spent almost a week there. We had met with lots of experts in state and local government and all of that. So we did publish, the special committee published our report last month, and I encourage folks to take a look at that. It's long, it's 118 pages, so you don't expect to read it all, but you can just read the executive summary, and it's on the Massachusetts Legislature's website, malegislature.gov, and you just go to the reports, and I really urge people to look at it, because the question of marijuana legalization is really not a simple yes or no question. There's a lot of things to consider. Marijuana today is vastly different from it was decades ago. It's much more potent today. The THC content is almost 10 times higher. It's more addictive. The health consequences are more dramatic, especially for young people. The kinds of products are different. You know, people don't even smoke marijuana anymore. They're vaping it. They are eating it in food and beverages. It's infused. Dabbing it. You probably never heard of that,
I
Tom.
don't know. I have no idea what that is.
It's actually that the THC is extracted from the plant, and once you extract this material, it's almost like a sort of thick, it almost looks like honey, and then that is either vaped or smoked, and it's extremely potent. It's the THC can be up close to 80-90%, whereas a joint maybe that someone may have smoked in the 1970s, 80s is about 3% THC. So it's very different. And the issue that we'll be looking at in Massachusetts is it's really not so much about whether you legalize it, it's whether we commercialize it. And what the ballot question would do is it would allow essentially a marijuana industry, a pot industry to take root in Massachusetts. There would be marijuana shops, that would be opening up in our communities. There would be, there could be marijuana advertising and marketing. Although we would certainly, if that were to happen, we would seek to put restrictions on it. But that's my biggest concern after doing all this research is that, if you have commercialization and you have, all these new products that are enticing to kids and you have advertising, we've seen that already with tobacco. And my worry would be that would lead more of our young people, teenagers, to start consuming it, and we know that's very dangerous to their health.
Well, it really is. When they're young like that, they don't realize their brain cells aren't fully developed yet, and they could have some problems right there.
Yeah, the latest research on this shows that brain development goes up to all the way to 25, and we have the most active brain development, when our brains are really being wired, when you're 14, 15, 16, 17. And so if that age, if kids are starting to use marijuana, and particularly the stuff today, which is so potent, as we talked about, the impact on their brain development, on their cognitive function, their learning capability, IQ, their mental health also. There's a very strong correlation with various mental health issues. It's pretty clear the science on this now is really, I think, very, very, very clear that for young people, it's unsafe to consume. And so my concern after researching this and going to Colorado is that if we legalize and then commercialize marijuana with a whole marijuana industry, and it's a profit-driven industry, it's going to be seeking to increase use of the product. That's a concern with young people, and unfortunately, we've seen that with the tobacco industry and how they've targeted teenagers.
So if we don't get a hold on this, we can be looking at a whole generation with all kinds of problems as they get older.
And we know we've got issues already today, of
we
course,
already
right?
have them,
I mean, Wake Up in Wakefield does a great job, but we know we've got major issues in our schools, and already with alcohol, with tobacco, with e-cigarettes, and with marijuana. So we can't, we have to face these head on. The real question is, would a proposal like legalization with creating a marijuana industry, does that help the problem, or does it make it worse? And my position after really looking hard at all of this and visiting Colorado to see what's happened there and other states is that I think we run a serious risk of making things worse.
And that will be on the ballot?
That almost certainly will be on the ballot, yes. The legislature is unlikely to take this issue up, so that means that the people who are pushing for the ballot question will most likely get the signatures they need, and then that would be on the ballot in November. So I really urge everyone to try to learn a bit about this issue and understand that it's marijuana today is very different from what people's image might be from the past. And again, this is really not a question of whether we think an adult should or shouldn't be able to smoke a joint. This is much more about whether we create a marijuana business, an industry, $1 billion industry in Massachusetts, and have all kinds of new products like marijuana-infused candy bars and brownies and gummy bears and things for sale, and a lot greater opportunity for young people, and making it seem more appealing to them, I think, than is the case today.
dangerous stuff out there. I don't know. It's a tough one.
Yeah, we need to educate
That's a tough
ourselves.
one,
And
yeah.
so, again, encourage, we did try to summarize everything we learned in this report, and again, it's on the Massachusetts Legislature's website, or anyone who's interested can always just email or call my office.
Well, we have a few minutes left. Do you have anything else you want to go over or bring up? Anything interesting?
Well, I can give a little preview of some
Yeah,
other things that
okay, yeah.
that we're working on. I am the chair of the Public Health Committee.
Okay.
So in addition to chairing the Special Senate Committee on Marijuana, my kind of day job is chairing the Public Health Committee. And one of the priorities we're working on in that committee is, we are looking at the increased use of e-cigarettes.
Okay,
So I just
yeah,
mentioned
yeah.
that before, and that's something called vaping, which a lot of adults kind of new to them. And so we're looking at legislation that I'm hopeful the Senate will take up in later this month of April that will deal with e-cigarettes and youth vaping,
Right.
as well as the potentially also raising the age from 18 to 21
yeah.
for the sale of cigarettes, which actually is already the case in Wakefield and in some of our other cities and towns, but not statewide. So we're working on that right now. We also are working on the state budget, which has to be completed by the end of June. And so the Senate, we're getting ready, we'll debate that in May. And I'm sure next time we get together, we
Yeah,
can
we'll
talk
have
more about that. But that's
more
very
about that.
important for all of our cities and towns. We talked about school funding, that's worked out in the budget. Local aid is in the budget. Funding for everything from mental health and substance abuse, and funding for our parks and recreation and public health and transportation and public safety. All of that is so it's very important to as we tackle that every year.
One of the things, I have to wrap it up here, so one of the things that I'm changing the subject at WCAT, where in Wakefield we're having this Movies on the Lake again. We did this last year, and this year we're going to do it again, and the response to it has been overwhelming. It's really good, so we're looking forward to something nice to do here in Wakefield.
Well,
so
we certainly look forward to nice, warm,
Oh my
sunny
goodness, I know it.
weather when we can be outside, and
hang in there.
we know it's coming
It's coming, right?
soon, we hope.
Well, thank you very much, Senator. It was wonderful, again, having you here and talking about these issues. I know we'll be back in another couple of months, maybe, or even sooner, talking about some of the decisions that are going to be made up there at the Hill, and you'll have a lot more information for us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks.
Okay, bye now.